Father was about to bury his baby girl, then he heard a cry coming from the coffin. The mobile phone slipped from John Carter's trembling hands, clattering against the kitchen floor. The world around him blurred, sound fading into a distant hum as the doctor's words echoed in his mind. "I'm sorry, Mr. Carter, but your daughter didn't make it." Just 3 hours ago, he had been reading Lily her favorite bedtime story, "Goodnight, Moon." Her tiny fingers had curled around his thumb as she drifted off to sleep, her rosebud lips forming a peaceful smile. How could she be gone? She was only 8 months old, perfect and healthy in every way. John stumbled to Lily's nursery, his legs barely supporting him. The room was exactly as he'd left it, stuffed animals arranged carefully on shelves, a mobile of silver stars dancing above the white wooden crib, and the soft yellow walls they'd painted together during Sarah's pregnancy. Before Sarah had walked out on them both, claiming she wasn't ready for motherhood. The emptiness of the crib struck him like a physical blow. Earlier that morning, when he'd found Lily unresponsive during her usual 6 a.m. feeding, he'd called 911 in a panic. The paramedics had arrived within minutes, their faces grim as they worked on her tiny body. They'd rushed her to St. Mary's Hospital while he followed in his car, praying to every deity he could think of. Now, standing in the doorway of her nursery, those frantic moments felt like a lifetime ago. The doctors had declared it SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome. "Sometimes these things just happen," they'd said, their voices clinically detached. "There's often no warning, no explanation." John sank into the rocking chair beside the crib, the same chair where he'd spent countless nights soothing Lily back to sleep. A stuffed elephant, her favorite, sat on the windowsill, its worn fabric catching the late afternoon sunlight. He reached for it, bringing it to his chest as tears finally broke free. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Daddy should have been there. I should have known something was wrong." The guilt was crushing. Should he have checked on her more frequently during the night? Had he missed some vital sign, some warning that his precious daughter was in danger? The rational part of his mind knew there was nothing he could have done. The doctors had been clear about that. But rationality held no power over a father's grief. His phone buzzed again from where it lay on the kitchen floor. Mechanically, he walked over and picked it up. Text messages and missed calls filled the screen. His sister Emma, his best friend Mark, neighbors who had somehow already heard the news. News traveled fast in their small community of Cedar Grove. The funeral home needed decisions. What kind of casket? Which cemetery? Would he want a viewing? The questions made him physically ill. How could he possibly think about burying his baby girl? It felt wrong on every level, like a violation of the natural order. Parents weren't supposed to outlive their children. Emma arrived first, letting herself in with the spare key. She found John still sitting in the rocking chair, clutching Lily's elephant. Without a word, she knelt beside him and wrapped her arms around his shoulders. Her presence broke something inside him, and he began to sob in earnest. "I can't do this, Em," he choked out. "I can't put her in the ground. She's supposed to be here, learning to crawl, saying her first words. She's supposed to grow up and have a life." "I know, Johnny," Emma whispered, her own tears falling. "I know." The next few days passed in a blur of paperwork and preparations. John moved through it all like a ghost, speaking only when necessary. The funeral director was understanding, guiding him gently through the decisions that needed to be made. They chose a small white casket, lined with pink satin. Emma helped him pick out a tiny white dress, the one they'd bought for Lily's upcoming baptism. Friends and neighbors brought food that went uneaten, offered condolences that fell on deaf ears. John spent hours in the nursery, surrounded by reminders of the life that should have been. He couldn't bring himself to pack anything away, not yet. Each stuffed animal, each tiny outfit held memories he wasn't ready to let go of. The morning of the funeral dawned cold and gray, fitting John's mood perfectly. He stood before the mirror, adjusting his black tie with numb fingers. The face that stared back at him was unrecognizable, hollow-eyed and aged beyond his 32 years. Dark stubble shadowed his jaw. He hadn't been able to summon the energy to shave. The small chapel at Cedar Grove Cemetery was filled with familiar faces. John barely registered their presence as he walked down the aisle, Emma's steadying hand on his arm. The white casket seemed impossibly small at the front of the room, surrounded by white roses and lilies. A photo of Lily, taken just last week, sat on an easel nearby, her blue eyes bright with laughter, 2 tiny teeth visible in her gummy smile. As the minister began to speak, John's mind wandered to the future that had been stolen from them. First steps he would never see, first words he would never hear. Birthday parties that would never be celebrated, school plays he would never attend. A lifetime of moments, reduced to memories of 8 short months. The service ended, and they moved to the graveside. John knelt beside the casket, placing his hand on its smooth surface. In his pocket, he could feel the weight of Lily's favorite pacifier, the one with the little pink butterfly. He couldn't bear the thought of her being without it. "I love you, princess," he whispered, his words meant for her alone. "Daddy loves you so much." The cemetery workers waited respectfully, ready to begin their somber task. John rose slowly, his legs unsteady. This was it, the final goodbye he wasn't ready to make. Emma squeezed his hand as the workers moved forward, preparing to lower the casket into the waiting grave. And then, through his grief, John heard something that made his heart stop. A soft whimper, barely audible above the whisper of wind through the cemetery's oak trees, reached John's ears. He froze, his breath catching in his throat. For a moment, he wondered if grief had finally broken his mind, if the desperate wish to hear his daughter's voice again had manufactured the sound from nothing but wind and leaves. Then it came again, stronger this time. A muffled cry, unmistakably that of an infant, emanating from the white casket before him. The cemetery workers had already begun to lower it, the straps creaking under the weight. "Stop!" John's voice exploded from his chest, shocking the mourners into silence. "Stop, please God, stop!" He lunged forward, nearly knocking over one of the flower arrangements as he reached for the casket. "John!" Emma's voice was thick with concern. "What are you?" Another cry cut through the air, and this time everyone heard it. Gasps rippled through the small crowd. The cemetery workers exchanged panicked glances, quickly raising the casket back to ground level. John's fingers scrambled at the casket's closure, his hands shaking so badly he could barely grip the metal fasteners. Someone, Mark, he thought, appeared beside him with a pocket knife, helping him pry open the locks. The sound of metal scraping against metal seemed to stretch for an eternity. Finally, the lid gave way. John threw it open, and the world seemed to stop spinning on its axis. There, lying on the pink satin, was Lily, her tiny chest rising and falling with each breath, her face scrunched up in distress. Her eyes were open, those familiar blue irises focusing on him as she let out another cry. "Oh my God!" Emma whispered behind him. "Oh my God!" John reached into the casket with trembling hands, scooping Lily into his arms. She was warm, gloriously, impossibly warm, and her little heart beat steadily against his chest. She quieted almost immediately in his embrace, recognizing her father's touch. "Call an ambulance!" someone shouted, but John was already moving. He couldn't wait for paramedics, couldn't trust anyone else with his daughter's life. Not after what had happened, whatever had happened. "I'm taking her to the hospital myself," he announced, his voice stronger than it had been in days. Emma ran ahead to his car, opening the back door where Lily's car seat was still installed. They hadn't had the heart to remove it yet. The drive to St. Mary's Hospital was a blur of red lights and honking horns as John broke every traffic law in existence. Emma sat in the back with Lily, who had drifted into what appeared to be a peaceful sleep. Every few seconds she confirmed that the baby was still breathing, still warm, still alive. "This isn't possible," Emma kept saying, her voice trembling. "John, they declared her finished. They showed you the death certificate. How could they make that kind of mistake?" But John wasn't thinking about the impossibility of it all. His mind was focused on a single memory, the doctor who had pronounced Lily finished, Dr. Matthews, and the strange way he had refused to meet John's eyes during their conversation. At the time, John had attributed it to the awkwardness of delivering such terrible news. Now, that memory took on a more sinister cast. They burst through the emergency room doors, John cradling Lily protectively against his chest. She was still sleeping, her breath warm against his neck. The same nurse who had been on duty when they brought Lily in 3 days ago was behind the desk. John watched as her face drained of color. "My daughter needs help," John announced loudly, drawing the attention of everyone in the waiting room. "The same daughter this hospital declared dead 3 days ago." The nurse, Linda, according to her name tag, stood up so quickly her chair rolled backward into the wall. I'll get a doctor right away," she stammered, hurrying through a set of double doors. Within moments, they were surrounded by medical staff, all wearing expressions of confused concern. A doctor John didn't recognize stepped forward, reaching for Lily. "No," John said firmly, taking a step back. "I want Dr. Matthews. He's the one who pronounced her dead. Where is he?" The medical staff exchanged glances. Finally, an older nurse spoke up. "I'm sorry, sir, but there's no Dr. Matthews on staff here. There never has been." The world seemed to tilt sideways. John looked at Emma, saw his own confusion mirrored in her face. "That's impossible. He was here 3 days ago. He signed Lily's death certificate. Sir?" The unknown doctor interrupted gently. "I've been on staff here for 15 years, and I can assure you we've never had a Dr. Matthews. Now, please let us examine your daughter. She clearly needs medical attention." John felt trapped, caught between his desperate need to protect Lily and the obvious necessity of having her checked out. Finally, he nodded, but refused to leave her side as they moved to an examination room. The doctor, Dr. Anderson, she introduced herself, was thorough in her examination. Lily woke during it but remained surprisingly calm, watching everything with curious eyes. When the examination was complete, Dr. Anderson's expression was bewildered. "She's perfectly healthy," she announced. "All vital signs are normal. No signs of trauma or distress. It's as if nothing ever happened to her." "I want to see her medical records from 3 days ago," John demanded. "And the death certificate." Dr. Anderson tapped at the computer terminal in the room, frowning. "Mr. Carter, there are no records of your daughter ever being admitted to this hospital. No death certificate, no examination notes, nothing." The room seemed to spin around John. He clutched the edge of the examination table, trying to steady himself. "That's not possible. There were dozens of people here, nurses, doctors, orderlies. They all saw us. They all knew what happened." But as he looked around the room, at the blank faces of the hospital staff, a chilling realization began to take hold. Something was very wrong here. Something that went beyond medical mistakes or clerical errors. Emma must have sensed his rising panic because she stepped forward, taking charge of the situation. "We need copies of whatever records you do have," she told Dr. Anderson firmly. "And we'll be taking Lily to another hospital for a second opinion." Dr. Anderson nodded, but as she turned to leave the room, John caught a glimpse of something in her eyes. Was it fear? She paused at the door, glancing back at them with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Mr. Carter," she said quietly, "if I were you, I'd be very careful about pursuing this matter. Sometimes it's better not to ask too many questions." Before John could respond, she was gone, leaving him with a sleeping daughter in his arms and a growing sense that they were all in terrible danger. John spent the night watching Lily sleep in her crib, afraid that if he looked away even for a moment, she might disappear. The soft glow of her butterfly nightlight cast dancing shadows on the walls, and the familiar hum of her white noise machine filled the room. Everything was exactly as it had been before this nightmare began, yet nothing felt the same. Emma had insisted on staying over, camping out on his living room couch. Neither of them wanted to voice their fears, but both knew they couldn't leave Lily alone, not even for a second. The warning in Dr. Anderson's voice kept echoing in John's mind. Sometimes it's better not to ask too many questions. But John had questions. Dozens of them. And he intended to get answers. Morning brought a new determination. After ensuring Emma would stay with Lily, John drove to the Cedar Grove police station. Officer Mike Sullivan, an old high school friend, was behind the front desk when he walked in. "John?" Mike's face registered surprise, then confusion. "Hi, we were at your daughter's funeral yesterday. What's going on?" For the next 20 minutes, John explained everything, finding Lily alive in the coffin, the missing hospital records, the mysterious Dr. Matthews who apparently never existed. With each detail, Mike's expression grew more troubled. "Look," Mike said finally, lowering his voice. "I want to help you. But without any evidence of wrongdoing, there's not much I can do officially. The hospital's records show nothing unusual. No death certificate was ever filed with the county. Even the funeral home has no paperwork for your daughter's service." "That's impossible," John protested. "I paid them. I signed documents. I chose the damn casket." Mike held up his hands. "I believe you, John. But believing you and being able to launch an investigation are two different things." He glanced around the nearly empty station before continuing. "Listen, there's something you should know. About 6 months ago, a woman came in here with a similar story. Said her baby was declared dead at St. Mary's, but when she demanded an autopsy, there was no record of the death. No record of the baby ever being at the hospital at all." John's heart began to race. "What happened to her?" "She disappeared," Mike said quietly. "Packed up and left town in the middle of the night. Never heard from her again." The case went cold. A chill ran down John's spine. He leaned forward, keeping his voice low. "Did you investigate the hospital?" "Tried to. But every time we started asking questions, we hit walls. The hospital board has some powerful connections. The investigation got shut down from above." Mike ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident on his face. "John, whatever's going on there, it's bigger than just missing records." John left the police station with more questions than answers. His next stop was the funeral home, but he found it mysteriously closed, despite it being a regular business day. Through the windows, he could see the office had been completely cleared out, no furniture, no files, nothing. His phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Come home now. Something weird is happening." John broke several speed limits getting back to his house. He found Emma pacing in the living room, Lily clutched tightly in her arms. "What's wrong?" he demanded. "A woman came to the door," Emma said, her voice shaking. "Said she was from Child Protective Services, doing a welfare check?" "But John, something felt off. She kept trying to look past me into the house, kept asking specifically about Lily. When I asked for her ID, she left quickly. I wrote down her car's license plate." John took Lily from Emma's arms, holding his daughter close as she babbled happily, unaware of the tension around her. "Did you call CPS?" "Already did. They have no record of sending anyone here. No one by that name works for them." The pieces were starting to form a terrifying pattern. John sat down heavily on the couch, his mind racing. "We need to document everything," he said finally. "Every detail, every person involved, every piece of paper we can find. Someone's trying to erase all evidence of what happened to Lily, but they can't erase our memories." Emma nodded, already pulling out her laptop. "I saved the funeral program," she said. "And I have photos from the service on my phone. They can't delete those." They spent the next several hours creating a detailed timeline of events, scanning documents, and saving everything to multiple secure cloud locations. John remembered the business card Dr. Matthews had given him and dug through his wallet, but it was gone, along with the hospital discharge papers he knew he'd put there. As evening approached, John's phone rang, an unknown number. He answered cautiously. "Mr. Carter?" The voice was female, trembling with fear. I was a nurse at St. Mary's when they brought your daughter in. I can't talk long, but you need to know, Dr. Matthews was real. He worked there for years. But now they're saying he never existed, and I'm scared. They're watching us. They made us sign papers, told us to forget everything we saw. Who's they? John asked urgently. What's really going on at St. Mary's? I can't. Her voice cracked. Just protect your daughter, Mr. Carter. Don't let them. The line went dead. John stared at his phone, his hands shaking. When he tried to call back, the number was no longer in service. That night, after Emma had gone home and Lily was asleep, John sat at his kitchen table with a growing pile of notes and questions. His laptop showed dozens of tabs, research into St. Mary's Hospital, its board members, its funding sources. The more he dug, the more disturbing patterns he found. The hospital had been involved in several mysterious cases over the past decade. Parents claiming their babies had been declared dead, only to disappear before any investigation could begin. Staff members quitting suddenly, moving away without explanation. And through it all, a web of connections to powerful people who seemed invested in keeping St. Mary's secrets buried. A soft noise from Lily's room sent him hurrying to check on her. She slept peacefully, one tiny hand curled around her favorite pacifier. Looking at her innocent face, John made a decision. He couldn't trust the police, couldn't trust the hospital, couldn't even trust that his phones and house weren't being watched. Tomorrow, he would take Lily to see Dr. James Chin, an independent pediatrician in the next town over. Maybe there, away from St. Mary's sphere of influence, they could finally start getting some answers. What John didn't know was that this decision would lead him down a path far darker and more dangerous than he could imagine. The truth about St. Mary's was worse than anything he had suspected, and there were people who would do anything to keep that truth hidden. The waiting room at Dr. Chen's private practice felt worlds away from St. Mary's sterile corridors. Potted plants brightened the corners, and children's artwork covered the walls. Still, John couldn't shake his paranoia. He'd taken 3 different routes to get here, constantly checking his rearview mirror for signs of being followed. Lily sat contentedly in his lap, playing with a wooden puzzle from the toy corner. She showed no signs of trauma from her ordeal, but that only deepened the mystery. How could a baby pronounced dead show absolutely no ill effects? Mr. Carter? A nurse called them back. Dr. Chin was already waiting in the examination room, a kind-faced man in his 50s with wire-rimmed glasses and gray-streaked hair. He listened intently as John recounted their story, his expression growing increasingly grave. May I examine her? Dr. Chin asked, holding out his arms. Lily went to him willingly, giggling as he checked her reflexes and listened to her heart. The examination was thorough, lasting nearly an hour. Finally, Dr. Chin sat back in his chair, removing his glasses to rub his eyes. Physically, your daughter is perfectly healthy, he began. No signs of any condition that could have been mistaken for death. No evidence of oxygen deprivation or trauma. In fact, he hesitated, choosing his words carefully. She shows remarkably good health for an infant who supposedly spent 3 days in a morgue. John leaned forward. What are you saying? Dr. Chin glanced at the closed door before lowering his voice. Mr. Carter, what I'm about to tell you, it could put us both in danger. But you need to know. Your daughter isn't the first case like this I've seen. He walked to a filing cabinet, unlocking a bottom drawer with a key from his pocket. 3 years ago, a couple brought their baby to me. Similar story, child declared dead at St. Mary's, then found alive just before burial. The parents were desperate for answers. He pulled out a thick file. I began keeping records connecting cases. What I found. He shook his head. It's almost too horrific to believe. John's heart pounded as Dr. Chin spread photographs across his desk. Each showed healthy infants with their parents, all with stories connecting back to St. Mary's. In the past 5 years, I've documented 12 cases. Babies declared dead, records erased, families intimidated into silence. But here's what's truly disturbing. I managed to track 9 of those families. Within months of their babies' resurrections, all but one had vanished. Moved away suddenly, leaving no forwarding address. The one family that stayed? Dr. Chen's voice cracked. Their baby disappeared from its crib 2 weeks later. Never found. The room seemed to spin around John. He clutched the edge of the examination table, trying to steady himself. But why? What could they possibly want with these babies? Dr. Chen pulled out another document, a complex diagram of connections and names. I believe St. Mary's is part of a sophisticated trafficking operation. They target specific infants, declare them dead to create a window of opportunity, then sell them to wealthy buyers. But sometimes, he gestured to Lily, who was happily stacking blocks on the floor. Sometimes something goes wrong. A buyer backs out, or the payment doesn't clear. Then the baby mysteriously comes back to life. That's insane, John whispered, but even as he said it, pieces began falling into place. The missing records, the vanishing doctor, the mysterious CPS visit. But how could they get away with it? Surely someone would notice? Follow the money, Dr. Chen said grimly, pointing to names on his diagram. St. Mary's board of directors includes some of the most powerful people in the state. The hospital receives massive donations from shell companies I've traced to offshore accounts. The local police chief's daughter suddenly got a full scholarship to an Ivy League school. The county medical examiner bought a vacation home he couldn't possibly afford on his salary. John felt sick. How deep does this go? Deeper than either of us can imagine. Dr. Chen began gathering his documents. Mr. Carter, you need to understand. These people will do anything to protect their operation. The only reason you're still alive is that they're trying to clean this up quietly. But if they think you're going to expose them... A sudden crash from the waiting room cut him off. Both men froze, hearing heavy footsteps approaching. Dr. Chen moved with surprising speed, shoving the files into John's hands and scooping up Lily. My nurse has instructions, he whispered urgently, leading them to a back door. If anyone unusual comes in, she triggers a silent alarm. Take these files. There's a USB drive inside with everything I've gathered. Get somewhere safe and contact this person. He pressed a business card into John's hand. She's a journalist who's been investigating trafficking rings. She can help you expose this. The footsteps grew closer. Dr. Chen pushed them through the door into a back alley. Go. Now. And Mr. Carter? His eyes were intense behind his glasses. Don't trust anyone. Not the police, not the hospitals, not even people you think are your friends. These people have eyes everywhere. John clutched Lily to his chest and ran, the precious files tucked under his arm. Behind him, he heard the examination room door burst open, followed by angry voices and Dr. Chen's calm replies. He forced himself not to look back, focusing only on getting to his car. As he buckled Lily into her car seat, his phone buzzed with a text from Emma. Where are you? Men in suits at your house. Say they're from hospital board. Looking for you and Lily. John's hands shook as he started the car. The truth about St. Mary's was even worse than he'd imagined, and now they were coming for them openly. He had evidence that could expose their entire operation, but using it would put him and Lily in unimaginable danger. As he pulled onto the highway, no destination in mind except away. John glanced at Lily in the rearview mirror. She had dozed off, clutching her favorite elephant toy. He made a silent promise to her. He would bring these monsters down, no matter the cost. But first, he had to keep her safe. The business card Dr. Chen had given him seemed to burn in his pocket. One phone call could start the process of exposing everything, but it would also paint an even bigger target on their backs. John had a decision to make, and he had to make it fast. The motel room was small and dated, with peeling wallpaper and a flickering fluorescent light, but it was anonymous, exactly what John needed right now. Lily slept peacefully in a portable crib he'd bought at a department store, along with supplies and clothes to replace everything they'd left behind. The journalist's business card lay on the scratched bedside table beside his burner phone, taunting him with possibilities and dangers. Her name was Catherine Martinez, and her reputation preceded her. 3 years ago, she'd exposed a corrupt adoption agency in Chicago that had been stealing babies from immigrant mothers. The story had won her a Pulitzer, and had also forced her into hiding for 6 months after multiple attempts on her life. John's regular phone, switched off and stuffed in a drawer, contained dozens of missed calls and texts from Emma. He hated leaving her in the dark, but Dr. Chen's warning echoed in his mind: trust no one. Even family could be manipulated if the stakes were high enough. The decision was made for him when his burner phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. St. Mary's. Midnight. Loading dock behind morgue. Bring nothing but yourself. Last chance for answers. John stared at the message, his pulse racing. It could be a trap. It was probably a trap. But it could also be his one opportunity to gather concrete evidence. He thought of Dr. Chen, who had risked everything to help them. Had they hurt him? Was he even still alive? He called the one person he knew could help, Mike Sullivan from the police department. I need a favor, John said when Mike answered. No questions asked? There was a long pause. You're putting me in a difficult position, John. They're trafficking babies, Mike. Children are being stolen from their families. How many more have to disappear before someone takes a stand? Another pause, longer this time. Finally, Mike sighed. What do you need? 2 hours later, John pulled into the parking lot of Happy Tots Daycare, where he'd arranged to meet Emma. She was waiting outside, pacing nervously. The daycare's owner, Mrs. Peterson, had been Emma's mentor when she first started teaching kindergarten. If there was anyone they could trust with Lily's safety, it was her. You're out of your mind, Emma hissed as he handed over Lily's diaper bag. This is insane, John. Let the police handle it. The police can't touch them, John replied, kissing Lily's forehead. Not without evidence. I have to do this. He didn't tell Emma about the wire Mike had given him, or the tracking device now hidden in his watch. If everything went wrong, at least there would be a record of what happened. The hospital grounds were eerily quiet at midnight. John parked in the visitor's lot and walked around to the loading dock, every shadow making him jump. A single security camera covered the area, but Mike had assured him it would be experiencing technical difficulties for the next hour. The metal door creaked open before he reached it. Linda, the nurse from the ER, stood in the shadows. Her face was drawn with fear and exhaustion. You came alone? She whispered. John nodded. Just like you asked? She ushered him inside, leading him through a maze of dimly lit corridors. They'll finish me if they find out I helped you, she said softly. But I can't live with it anymore. The things I've seen, the babies they've taken. They reached a heavy door marked Medical Records Authorized Personnel Only. Linda swiped her keycard, hands trembling. Everything's digital now, but they keep backups. Paper trails they thought they destroyed. She pointed to a row of filing cabinets. Bottom drawer, under Insurance Audits 2019. The real records are hidden there. John moved quickly, finding the drawer she indicated. Inside, behind a false back, he discovered a treasure trove of evidence. Lists of babies targeted for collection, financial transactions disguised as medical expenses, even photographs of hospital staff meeting with well-dressed individuals and parking garages. How long has this been going on? He asked, documenting everything with his phone's camera. Years, Linda replied, keeping watch at the door. They choose babies whose parents they think won't cause trouble. Single parents, poor families, people without connections. They fake the deaths, erase the records, and sell the babies to wealthy buyers who can't adopt through legal channels. Your daughter. She hesitated. The buyer backed out at the last minute. Something about a birthmark that wasn't in the photos. So they had to return her. John's hands shook with rage as he photographed document after document. Names of hospital board members, offshore account numbers, dates of transactions, it was all here. Why are you helping me now? Because last week they took my niece's baby, Linda whispered. Declared him dead from complications during delivery. I knew it was a lie, but I couldn't. I couldn't stop them. Please, you have to expose this. You have to. The door burst open, flooding the room with harsh fluorescent light. Dr. Anderson stood there, flanked by two men in dark suits. Her face showed no surprise, only cold calculation. "I'm disappointed, Linda," she said softly. "After everything the hospital has done for you." One of the men moved forward, reaching inside his jacket. But before he could draw whatever weapon he was carrying, alarms began blaring throughout the building. Red emergency lights strobed in the corridors, and a voice over the intercom announced a hazardous materials spill in the pediatric ward. In the moment of confusion, John bolted. He heard shouts behind him, followed by the sound of running feet, but he had memorized the layout of the hospital during Lily's stay. He knew every shortcut, every maintenance corridor. He burst out of a side door into the parking lot, gasping for breath. His phone was already uploading the photos to a secure cloud drive Mike had set up. Even if they caught him now, the evidence would survive. Tires screeched on pavement as a black SUV rounded the corner. John prepared to run again, but the passenger window rolled down, revealing Mike's face. "Get in!" Mike shouted. "Now!" John dove into the vehicle as the men in suits emerged from the hospital. Mike floored the accelerator, and the SUV roared out of the parking lot. "Did you get what you needed?" Mike asked, eyes fixed on the road. John nodded, still catching his breath. "Everything. Names, dates, bank accounts, proof of at least 50 babies they've trafficked. But they'll come after us. They'll try to stop us from exposing them." Mike's grim smile reflected in the rearview mirror. "Let them try. Catherine Martinez is already waiting at the station with a federal task force. They've been building a case for months. They just needed concrete evidence to move on the hospital board. And Linda? Protective custody. She sent us a message right after she contacted you. Smart woman, she knew they'd catch her, so she made sure to get herself arrested for trespassing before they could make her disappear." John closed his eyes, relief washing over him. It wasn't over. There would be trials, testimonies, constant looking over their shoulders. But they had done it. The truth about St. Mary's would finally come to light. "Take me to Lily," he said. "Please. I need to hold my daughter." 6 months later, John sat in a crowded courtroom, watching as Judge Harrison delivered the verdict. Dr. Anderson and 5 members of St. Mary's Hospital Board stood ashen-faced as the judge read out their sentences. 25 years to life for each count of child trafficking. No possibility of parole. The investigation had uncovered a network far larger than anyone had imagined. 73 babies had been stolen over the past decade, sold to wealthy buyers across 3 continents. The evidence John and Linda had gathered that night led to raids on private adoption agencies, corrupt medical facilities, and shell companies across the country. Thanks to Catherine Martinez's reporting, the story made international headlines. "Breaking Baby Ring, the hospital that stole children," ran on front pages worldwide. Her series of articles exposed not just the trafficking operation, but the systemic corruption that had allowed it to flourish, the bought officials, the silenced witnesses, the mountains of laundered money. Most importantly, the evidence helped locate many of the stolen children. Recovery operations were ongoing, but already 38 babies had been reunited with their birth families. John thought of Linda's niece, who had collapsed in tears when police brought back her son, alive and healthy, from a wealthy couple in Singapore. Not all the stories had happy endings. Some babies were never found. Some families had been destroyed by grief and false hope. Dr. Chin had paid a heavy price for his help. The men who burst into his office that day had put him in the hospital with severe injuries. But he survived, and his testimony proved crucial in securing the convictions. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed around John and Catherine. "Mr. Carter," they called out. "How does it feel to be the one who brought down St. Mary's?" "I'm not the hero here," John replied, thinking of Linda's courage, Dr. Chen's sacrifice, Mike's loyalty, and Catherine's relentless pursuit of the truth. "I just wanted to protect my daughter. The real heroes are the people who risked everything to expose this evil and bring these children home." Later that evening, John walked through the front door of their new home in a different state, where he and Lily had relocated for safety during the trial. Emma had moved nearby, unwilling to let her brother and niece face this new chapter alone. The sound of Lily's laughter echoed from the backyard, where she was playing with her cousin in a small inflatable pool. The nightmares hadn't completely stopped. John still woke sometimes in cold sweats, reaching frantically for Lily's crib. But they were less frequent now. The security system Mike had recommended helped him sleep better, as did the knowledge that the people responsible were behind bars. Walking into the backyard, John watched Lily splash happily in the pool, her now toddling legs kicking up sheets of water as Emma supervised. She'd grown so much in the past 6 months, saying her first words, taking her first steps, developing a personality that was uniquely her own. Every milestone felt like a miracle, a gift he'd almost lost. "Dada!" Lily squealed when she saw him, holding out her arms. Water dripped from her curls as he scooped her up, not caring that she was soaking his suit. "There's my brave girl," he whispered, holding her close. She smelled of sunscreen and baby shampoo, alive and perfect and safe. Emma smiled at them, understanding in her eyes. "The news is already online," she said, holding up her phone. "They're calling it the largest child trafficking bust in U.S. history. The FBI is investigating 3 other hospitals based on evidence they found at St. Mary's." John nodded, but his attention was on Lily, who was patting his face with wet hands. "Hat," she declared proudly, pointing to his tie. They were still working on vocabulary. "That's right, princess," he laughed. "Almost. It's a tie." Later, after Lily was tucked into bed with her favorite elephant, John sat on his back porch with Emma, sharing a bottle of wine. The summer air was warm, filled with the sound of crickets and distant traffic. "Have you heard from Sarah?" Emma asked carefully. Lily's mother had reached out after seeing the story on the news, full of guilt and regret for abandoning them. "She wants to meet Lily," John replied, swirling the wine in his glass. "I told her we could discuss it when Lily's older. Right now we need stability." Emma nodded, understanding. "And what about you? Are you okay?" John considered the question. The past 6 months had changed him profoundly. He'd learned the world could be darker than he'd ever imagined, but also that courage and justice could still prevail. He'd discovered strength he didn't know he had, and found allies in unexpected places. "I'm getting there," he said finally. "We both are." A soft cry from Lily's room sent him hurrying inside, old fears briefly resurfacing. But she was just stirring in her sleep, clutching her elephant. John adjusted her blanket and sat in the rocking chair beside her crib, watching the rise and fall of her chest. On her dresser sat a framed photograph, Lily with Dr. Chin, Linda, Mike, Catherine, and all the others who had helped save her. Below it was a stack of letters from other parents whose children had been recovered thanks to their efforts. Each one told a story of loss, hope, and reunion. John had started a foundation with part of the settlement money from St. Mary's. The Lily's Light Foundation worked to prevent child trafficking and support families who had been victims of similar schemes. It wasn't much against the vast darkness of the world, but it was something, a way to turn their trauma into hope for others. As he watched his daughter sleep, John reflected on their journey. They had survived something unimaginable, exposed a terrible truth, and helped bring justice to families torn apart by greed and corruption. But more than that, they had shown that love could triumph over evil, that one person's refusal to accept a lie could spark a revolution of truth. Lily stirred again, her tiny hand reaching out. John gently took it in his own, marveling at how something so small could contain so much strength. They had a long road ahead, healing, growing, building a new life from the ashes of their ordeal. But they would walk it together, father and daughter, survivors and warriors. In the end, that was all that mattered. Lily was safe. She was loved. And her light would help guide others out of darkness. "Sweet dreams, my brave girl," John whispered, kissing her forehead. "Daddy's here. Daddy will always be here." And in the peaceful darkness of their new home, surrounded by the love of family and the strength of true friends, John and Lily Carter slept soundly, ready to face whatever tomorrow might bring.